The throne room had not known silence in 3 centuries. Once, it had trembled with the whispers of courtiers, the rustle of velvet and silk, the crystalline laughter of immortals who believed themselves untouchable. Once, chandeliers had blazed with 1,000 candles, their light dancing across polished obsidian floors and reflecting in the eyes of those who bowed before the throne. Once, this place had been the beating heart of an empire that stretched from the Crimson Mountains to the Whispered Sea, a kingdom where night reigned eternal and the sun was merely a distant memory spoken of in children's tales. Now, the silence pressed down like a physical weight, broken only by the slow drip of water somewhere in the darkness, the occasional skitter of debris falling from damaged walls, and the ragged breathing of a woman who had once commanded armies with a single glance. Seraphine Valdris, the eternal queen, the blood sovereign, the crimson crown, she who had been called by 100 titles across 100 battlefields, sat slumped upon her throne of black marble and silver filigree. The throne itself bore the scars of violence. Deep gouges where swords had struck, cracks spider webbing outward from impacts, and dark stains that were not merely rust. Her gown, once a masterpiece of midnight silk embroidered with patterns that seemed to move in candlelight, now hung in tatters around her body. The crimson accents had been chosen to hide bloodstains during times of war. Now fresh blood soaked through the fabric in blotches that spread slowly, relentlessly, like ink on parchment. Her wings, magnificent bat-like structures that had once spread 20 feet from tip to tip, capable of blotting out the moon itself, lay broken behind her. The right wing was bent at an unnatural angle, the delicate membrane torn in several places, revealing the elegant bone structure beneath. The left was folded awkwardly, clearly causing her pain whenever she shifted. These wings had carried her across battlefields, had cast shadows over entire armies, had once been the symbol of her absolute dominion over the night. Now they were as broken as everything else in this forsaken hall. Her silver hair, once maintained with oils and spells that kept it flowing like liquid moonlight, now fell in tangled waves over her shoulders and down her back, matted in places with blood, some of it her own, much of it belonging to those who had betrayed her. Her skin, naturally pale as alabaster, seemed almost translucent now in the moonlight that streamed through the shattered cathedral windows above. Those windows had once been stained glass masterpieces depicting the history of her reign. Her coronation at 17, the conquest of the southern territories, the great treaty with the werewolf clans, the night she had turned back an invasion of demonkind at the gates of sorrow. Now they were jagged edges and empty frames, most of the glass lying in colored shards across the floor, crunching underfoot like the bones of the past. But it was her eyes that told the true story. Those crimson eyes which had stared down kings and made warriors weep, which had blazed with fury and frozen with contempt, which had never, in 300 years of unlife, shown fear or doubt. Those eyes now reflected something far worse than pain. They reflected betrayal, disbelief, the kind of soul-deep wound that no amount of vampiric regeneration could heal. She had seen them leave, one by one. First the opportunists, those who had always served out of fear rather than loyalty. They had slipped away when the battle turned, when the enemy forces proved more numerous than anticipated, when it became clear that this night might actually see the end of the Eternal Queen's reign. She had expected nothing more from them. Then the mercenaries had gone, those who fought for gold and glory. When both seemed unlikely, they found pressing business elsewhere. This too she understood. But then the courtiers had fled, those who had danced in her halls and drunk her wine and sworn eternal devotion. Then her generals, men and women she had elevated from nothing, had given them power and position and wealth beyond measure. Then her personal guard, vampires she had sired herself, who carried her blood in their veins, who should have been bound to her by ties deeper than mere loyalty. And finally, as dawn approached and the enemy regrouped outside the walls, her inner circle had departed. Her advisors of centuries. Her companions. Those she had, foolish notion, considered friends. The last one to leave had been Marius, her Grand Chamberlain, a vampire of 200 years whom she had rescued from execution when he was human, whom she had taught personally, whom she had trusted with the keys to her treasury and the secrets of her heart. He had stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the fires burning in the city below, and she had seen his hand on the door frame, seen him hesitate. For one moment she had thought, had hoped. But he had looked back at the destruction, at her wounds, at the blood pooling beneath her throne, and his expression had shifted from uncertainty to calculation. She knew that look. She had worn it herself many times. It was the look of someone weighing odds and finding them unfavorable. It was the look of someone choosing survival over sentiment. "Forgive me, my queen," he had whispered, and then he was gone, his footsteps echoing through empty corridors, growing fainter, then silent. That had been perhaps an hour ago. Perhaps more. Time seemed to have lost meaning in the aftermath of abandonment. She sat on her throne because she could not bring herself to move, because moving would mean acknowledging that there was somewhere to go, something to do, a future to face. And she could not see any future from where she sat. Not anymore. The cleansing army would return. They always did. Paladins and priests, holy warriors armed with blessed silver and sanctified steel, backed by the Church of the Radiant Dawn and funded by kingdoms who feared the night. They had been hunting her for decades, but she had always been too strong, too clever, too well protected. Tonight they had finally broken through. Tonight they had shattered her armies, breached her walls, stormed her palace. She had fought, gods, how she had fought, and her strength had driven them back, but at terrible cost. The wounds she bore would take days to heal, even with blood. And she had no time. No blood. No allies. No reason, perhaps, to heal at all. The thought surprised her with its quietness. She had survived so much. Centuries of war and intrigue, assassination attempts and coups, plagues and purges. She had built an empire from warring factions and ruled it with an iron fist tempered by wisdom. She had been called tyrant and savior, monster and guardian, depending on who spoke. She had never been called weak. She had never given up. But she had also never been alone. A sound broke through her reverie, the scrape of a boot on stone. Her head snapped up, crimson eyes flaring with sudden intensity, fangs baring instinctively. After everything they dared return? Had they come back to beg forgiveness? To loot what remained? To finish what the paladins had started? But the figure that emerged from the shadows at the far end of the throne room was not one of her former servants. He was human. That was the first thing she registered. The scent of him, the warmth of living blood pumping through mortal veins, the subtle wrongness of a living being in a place that had been the domain of the undead for so long. The second thing she noticed was that he was armed and armored, though his equipment had clearly seen better days. The steel plate armor was scored and dented in a dozen places, the edges of the metal discolored from heat and impact. His cloak, once probably a deep blue, was torn and stained with mud and blood. A long sword hung at his hip, the blade visible in its partially drawn state, and she could see the nicks and chips along its edge. This was a weapon that had seen real combat, recently and extensively. But he was not attacking. That was the third thing she noticed, and perhaps the most confusing. He was walking toward her throne with steady, purposeful steps, but his sword remained sheathed. His hands were visible, empty of weapons. His posture was alert but not aggressive. And his face. She studied his face as he crossed the vast expanse of the throne room, his boots crunching on broken glass and scattered rubble. He was young, perhaps 30 years in mortal terms, with the kind of weathered handsomeness that spoke of a life lived outdoors, under sun and stars. His hair was dark brown, cut short for practicality, and his jaw was shadowed with several days' worth of stubble. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, gray eyes, the color of storm clouds, that looked at her not with the hatred she expected from a human warrior, not with the fear that mortals usually showed in her presence, not even with the cold calculation of an assassin sizing up his target. He looked at her with something that might have been compassion. "Your Majesty," he said, and his voice was rough, as though he had been shouting recently, or perhaps simply had not spoken in some time. He stopped about 20 feet from the base of her throne, at what might be considered a respectful distance in court protocol, if court protocol still mattered in a court that no longer existed. "I know you don't know me. I know you have no reason to trust me. But I'm asking you to let me help." Seraphine stared at him for a long moment, her mind struggling to process this impossibility. A human, here, offering help, to her. The absurdity of it threatened to pull a laugh from her throat, though she suspected that if she started laughing now, it would not sound sane. "Help?" she repeated, her voice hoarse. When had she last spoken? Hours ago, shouting orders that were no longer obeyed? "You wish to help me." A human wishes to help the vampire queen. She leaned forward slightly, ignoring the sharp pain that lanced through her side from the movement, studying him with renewed intensity. Are you mad? Suicidal? Or simply lost? None of the above, he replied, and there was something in his tone, a steadiness, a calm certainty, that gave her pause. My name is Marcus Strand. I was a lieutenant in the Greyhaven militia before he paused, seemed to reconsider his words. Before I learned some things that made me question who I was fighting for and why. A deserter then, she said, and there was no mockery in her voice, only a flat statement of fact. A questioner, he corrected. There's a difference. I swore an oath to protect the innocent and fight evil. I'm just not convinced anymore that those definitions are as simple as the church claims. He gestured around the ruined throne room. I've been watching this siege for 3 days. I've seen what the Holy Army does when it takes a city. I've heard the screams. Seraphine felt something twist in her chest, an emotion she could not immediately name. And you think that makes me innocent? That makes me good? I'm a vampire human. I have killed more of your kind than you could count in a lifetime. I have drunk blood and ended lives and ruled through fear and power. I am exactly what they say I am. Maybe, Marcus acknowledged, taking a careful step closer. But I also know what they don't say. I know that under your rule, the mortal villages in this territory were protected from raider clans and monster attacks. I know that you established trade routes that brought prosperity to regions that had known only poverty. I know that you punished your own kind for taking innocent life without cause. I know that 3 winters ago, when famine struck the eastern provinces, you opened your stores and kept thousands from starving, human thousands. He met her eyes, unflinching despite the crimson glow. The church doesn't mention that in their sermons about the evil vampire queen who must be destroyed. She wanted to dismiss his words, to scoff at this naive mortal who thought he understood the complexities of ruling, who thought that a few good deeds could balance centuries of darkness. But she found she could not speak, because he was right. She had done those things. She had made those choices. Not out of altruism, she was not that foolish, but because she had learned long ago that a ruler who bled her subjects dry soon found herself with nothing left to rule. Stability required balance. Power required wisdom. Fear alone could not sustain an empire. But none of that mattered now. None of it had saved her. Your history lesson is touching, she said finally, her voice colder now, drawing on the armor of cruelty because it was the only protection she had left. But it changes nothing. My empire has fallen. My people have abandoned me. In an hour, perhaps less, the cleansing army will return to finish what they started. And no amount of moral philosophy from an idealistic deserter will change that reality. She leaned back against her throne, feeling the cold marble against her damaged wings, welcoming the pain because at least pain was something she understood. So I will ask you again, what do you want? Why are you here? Marcus reached the base of the steps leading up to her throne and, to her utter shock, knelt. Not in submission. His posture was too straight for that, his head too high, but in the formal gesture of a knight presenting himself to a liege lord. His hand went to the sword at his hip, and she tensed, but he merely drew it and planted the point into the cracked marble of the step, leaving it standing upright between them like a barrier or a promise. I told you, he said quietly. I'm here to help. Your empire may have fallen, but you're still alive. Your people may have abandoned you, but you're not alone. Not anymore. He looked up at her, and in the moonlight streaming through the broken windows, his gray eyes seemed to hold stars. The cleansing army is regrouping, yes. But they're not preparing for a final assault. They think you're already finished. They're too busy looting the city and arguing about who gets to claim credit for your defeat. We have time. Not much, but enough. Enough for what? She asked, and hated the note of something that might have been hope in her voice. To get you out of here. To get you somewhere safe where you can heal. He glanced at her wings, her wounds, her exhausted posture, and his expression softened. You've ruled for 300 years, Your Majesty. You've survived wars and assassinations and the rise and fall of kingdoms. Do you really want it to end like this? Alone in a broken throne room, waiting for zealots to cut off your head so they can parade it through the streets. Seraphine felt something crack inside her. Not her bones or her armor, but something deeper, something she had not realized had been holding her together until this moment. She looked at this human, this Marcus Strand, this deserter-turned-questioner who had walked into her ruined palace and offered her the one thing she had not expected to find in this world again. Someone who refused to leave. Why? She whispered, and it was the sound of 3 centuries of pride shattering. Why would you do this? You owe me nothing. You risk everything. If you're caught helping me, they'll kill you in ways that make a clean death look like mercy. Why? Marcus was silent for a moment, and when he spoke, his words were simple but they carried the weight of absolute conviction. Because everyone deserves someone who stays. Because loyalty shouldn't be conditional on victory. Because I've seen too many people abandoned by those who claim to love them, and I swore I'd never be that person. He extended his hand toward her, palm up, an offering. And because, Your Majesty, someone needs to prove that not all humans are the monsters the vampires fear, just as someone once tried to prove that not all vampires are the monsters the church claims. She stared at his hand, calloused, scarred, trembling slightly either from exhaustion or emotion, and felt the last of her defenses crumble. Slowly, moving through pain that made her teeth clench, she reached out and placed her hand in his. Her fingers, pale and elegant and stained with blood, looked strange against his weathered skin. He closed his hand around hers gently, carefully, as though she were made of glass rather than being one of the most dangerous predators on Earth. His skin was warm. She had forgotten how warm living flesh could be. The heat of it traveled up her arm, and for a moment she felt something she had not felt in longer than she could remember. She felt less alone. I don't even know if I can walk, she admitted, the words bitter. My wings are broken. My ribs are cracked. I've lost too much blood and have none to replace it. Then we'll take it slow, Marcus said, rising but keeping hold of her hand. One step at a time. I have a hiding place prepared, an old monastery about 5 miles from here, abandoned for decades. The irony of a vampire hiding in holy ground isn't lost on me, but that's exactly why they won't look there. It's stocked with supplies including blood. Animal blood, he added quickly, seeing her expression. I couldn't exactly raid the city's blood stores, but I hunted before I came. There's enough to help you start healing. She wanted to ask how he had known to prepare this, how long he had been planning this rescue, how he had even known where to find her. But those questions could wait. Right now, all that mattered was the simple, impossible fact that he was here and he was staying. Help me up, she said, her voice steady despite everything. If we're doing this madness, we should do it before I come to my senses. Marcus smiled, the first smile she had seen from him, and it transformed his weathered face, made him look younger, less burdened. Your Majesty, I think sanity left this situation several deaths ago. We're well past reasonable at this point. He moved to her side, careful of her wings, and slid one arm around her waist while offering the other for her to grip. She allowed herself to lean on him, feeling the strength in his frame despite his purely human limitations, and together they managed to get her standing. Pain shot through her body in waves and she felt her legs threatening to give out, but his grip was steady, unyielding. I've got you, he murmured. I've got you. And the terrible thing, the wonderful, terrible, impossible thing, was that she believed him. They made their way down the steps from the throne, each movement a careful negotiation between her injuries and his support. Her wings dragged behind her, leaving trails in the dust and debris, and she tried not to think about how long it would take them to heal, tried not to calculate whether she would ever fly again. Those were concerns for a future that might not exist. Right now, all that mattered was putting one foot in front of the other. The throne room seemed even larger now that she was crossing it as a refugee rather than a ruler. She saw details she had not noticed from her elevated position. The bodies of fallen guards, both hers and the enemy's, lying where they had fallen in the final battle. The scattered remains of treasures that had been dropped by fleeing courtiers, jeweled goblets, gold chains, silk scarves that would sell for a fortune in the mortal markets. The dark stains on the walls where blood had sprayed during combat. The scorch marks from fire spells and holy magic. This had been her seat of power. Now it was a tomb. They reached the grand doorway at the far end of the hall, its massive oak doors hanging open on broken hinges. Beyond lay the corridor she had walked thousands of times, its walls lined with portraits of her predecessors and tapestries depicting great moments in the history of her line. Or they had been. Now the portraits were torn, the tapestries burned, the once polished floor littered with destruction. We'll need to move through the servants' passages, Marcus said quietly. The main corridors are too exposed and there are still patrols in the palace. They're mainly interested in looting at this point, but we don't want to risk an encounter. You've scouted extensively, she observed, her voice strained as she focused on keeping her breathing steady through the pain. 3 days of watching, he confirmed. I needed to understand the layout, the patterns. I couldn't just walk in here blind and hope for the best. And yet you walked in here at all. Into a palace under siege, occupied by an army that would kill you on sight if they knew your intentions. That seems fairly blind to me. He glanced at her, and there was something almost playful in his expression despite their circumstances. Your Majesty, sometimes the only way forward is through the fire. You either burn or you emerge stronger. I chose to risk the burning. She filed that away. This human had a philosophical streak that was either admirable or dangerous, she had not decided which. They turned into a side passage, one that she recognized as leading to the kitchens and then to the servants' stairs. It was narrower here, darker, and she was grateful for the shadows. Her vampiric vision allowed her to see perfectly well in the darkness, and she noticed that Marcus moved with surprising confidence as well. Either he had exceptional night vision for a human, or he had indeed scouted very carefully. They encountered the first body at the intersection with the kitchen corridor. One of her servants, a vampire named Talia who had managed the household for 50 years, lay crumpled against the wall with a wooden stake through her heart and her head removed. Seraphine felt Marcus tense beside her, felt his free hand move toward his sword, but there was no threat here now. Only the evidence of what had been done to those who had not fled fast enough. I'm sorry, Marcus said quietly, and she knew he meant it. She served faithfully, Seraphine replied, her voice flat. She deserved better than this. They all did. She forced herself to look away to keep moving. There will be time for mourning later. Or there won't be. Either way, standing here changes nothing. They navigated through the kitchen, once a place of bustling activity, now a disaster of overturned tables and smashed crockery, and found the servants' stairs. These were narrow and steep, designed for functionality rather than grandeur, and descending them with her injuries was a fresh agony. Her wings caught on the walls more than once, drawing hissed curses from her lips, and she felt Marcus wince in sympathy each time. At the bottom of the stairs was a door that led to the palace's lowest level, a network of storage rooms, wine cellars, and old dungeons that had not been used in over a century. Seraphine had converted them to archives, places to store the accumulated records and treasures of her reign. She wondered distantly if the cleansing army had found them, if they were even now burning centuries of history because it had been touched by vampire hands. But Marcus led her past the archive entrance, through a corridor she barely remembered, to a section of the cellars that had always been storage for mundane supplies. Barrels of oil, sacks of grain kept to feed the mortal servants, tools for maintenance. At the far end, behind a rack of empty barrels, was a small wooden door that she had probably not thought about in decades. Storm drain, Marcus explained, pulling the barrels aside with surprising efficiency. Clearly he had done this before, probably when he set up his hiding place. It leads to the old city sewers which connect to the river. The monastery I mentioned is upstream, built on a cliff overlooking the water. It's a longer route than going overground but much safer. Seraphine looked at the small door, then at her wings and felt a wave of despair. I won't fit. Not with these. Marcus was quiet for a moment and she saw him calculating, thinking. Then he moved to face her directly, his expression serious but not unkind. I need you to trust me. This is going to hurt but it's necessary. I need to fold your wings tighter against your back and bind them. The passage is narrow, but if we can compress your profile, you'll fit. She understood what he was saying. Her wings were already injured. Forcing them to fold more tightly would be excruciating. But he was right, there was no other way. Do it, she said through gritted teeth. Quickly. He worked with surprising gentleness despite the urgency, his hands careful as he manipulated the damaged wing structures. She felt the bones grinding, felt torn membranes stretching, and the pain was a white-hot spike that drove through her back and into her brain. She heard herself make a sound, not quite a scream but close, and felt her fangs fully extend in an automatic pain response. Her hand shot out and gripped his shoulder, her fingers digging in hard enough that she knew it must hurt him, but he didn't flinch, didn't stop. He just kept working, murmuring apologies until both wings were folded as tightly as they could be against her back. I need something to bind them with, he said, looking around. His eyes fell on one of the torn tapestries that had been stored down here. He tore strips from it, and she might have laughed at the irony. This particular tapestry depicted her coronation, and now it was being used to bind her in her moment of greatest weakness, but she did not have the energy. He wrapped the fabric around her torso, securing the wings in their folded position, working quickly but carefully. When he finished, she was breathing hard, her vision swimming slightly from the pain. But her profile was significantly narrower. She might actually fit through that door. Marcus retrieved his sword from where he had left it upstairs. No, she realized he had a second blade, a shorter sword on his back that she had not noticed before. This one he drew now, holding it ready as he opened the storm drain door. A smell wafted out, damp stone, mildew, the distant reek of sewage. Wonderful. Your Majesty, he said, turning to her with a slight bow that would have been formal if they were not standing in a cellar preparing to crawl through sewers. Your escape route awaits. Despite everything, she felt the corner of her mouth twitch. Your sense of humor is poorly timed, human. Marcus, he corrected gently. If we're going to be crawling through sewers together, we might as well be on a first-name basis. I am the Eternal Queen, she replied automatically. I am not on a first-name basis with anyone. All right, he said easily, not arguing. What would you like me to call you then? She paused because the truth was that no one had asked her that question in longer than she could remember. Everyone called her by her titles. Your Majesty, Your Highness, my Queen, the Blood Sovereign. Even her closest confidants had not used her given name in, how long? A century? More? Seraphine, she heard herself say. My name is Seraphine. Marcus smiled again, that warm expression that seemed so out of place in this nightmare. It's an honor to meet you, Seraphine. Now let's get you out of here before the honor becomes a death sentence for both of us. He went through the door first, sword in hand, checking that the way was clear. Then he reached back for her, helping her navigate the low opening. The passage beyond was indeed narrow. She had to turn sideways to fit, and even then her bound wings scraped against the walls. But she fit. Barely. They moved through the darkness, Marcus in the lead and Seraphine following, one hand on the damp stone wall for balance, the other occasionally reaching forward to steady herself on his shoulder. The passage sloped downward, and she could hear water running somewhere ahead. The air was cold and stale, and she was grateful that her vampiric senses meant she did not need to breathe much. The smell would have been overwhelming otherwise. Time lost meaning in the darkness. They walked for what might have been 10 minutes or an hour, navigating turns and intersections that Marcus seemed to know by memory. Once they heard voices echoing from somewhere above, patrol guards or looters moving through the palace overhead. They froze, pressing themselves against the wall, barely breathing until the sounds faded. Finally, the passage opened into a larger chamber, one of the main sewer tunnels. This was wider, with a raised walkway along one side and a channel of dark water flowing sluggishly in the center. The ceiling was arched stone, covered in moisture and things she did not care to examine too closely. Marcus helped her onto the walkway and they paused for a moment, both of them catching their breath. The river access is about half a mile downstream, Marcus said quietly. The current is manageable at this time of year, and I have a boat hidden under the old fisher's dock. From there, it's a short row to the monastery. Seraphine nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The pain in her back had become a constant roar, and she could feel her strength fading. She needed blood, needed rest, needed time to heal. But she also knew that stopping now would mean they had come this far for nothing. Keep moving, she said, her voice hoarse. I can make it. They continued along the walkway, their footsteps echoing softly in the enclosed space. The tunnel seemed endless, stretching on and on into darkness, but Marcus navigated it with confidence. She wondered again how long he had been planning this, how much preparation had gone into what had seemed like a spontaneous rescue. How long, she asked, breaking the silence. How long have you been planning this extraction? He glanced back at her, his face half-shadowed in the dim light filtering from grates above. I started watching the siege 4 days ago. I started planning your escape 3 days ago. I started questioning whether the church was right about you 6 months ago, when I was stationed in one of the border villages and saw what your rule actually meant for the people there. Real answer? I think I've been moving toward this moment for a year. I just didn't know it until I saw this city falling and realized I couldn't stand by and watch it happen. You barely know me, she said. You've never spoken to me before tonight. Everything you think you know about me could be propaganda or rumor or wishful thinking. I could be exactly the monster they say I am. You could be, he agreed. But I don't think you are. And I'm a pretty good judge of character. It's kept me alive through a lot of situations that should have killed me. You're a soldier, she observed. You've been trained to follow orders, to see the world in clear definitions of enemy and ally. How does a man like that end up questioning everything he's been taught? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried an old pain. My sister was killed by vampires when I was 15. Rogue vampires, nomads passing through our village looking for easy prey. They tore through the town like wolves through a flock of sheep, killed 30 people before moving on. My sister was one of them. That's why I joined the militia, why I signed up for the cleansing army when they came recruiting. I wanted revenge. I wanted to kill the monsters who had destroyed my family. Seraphine felt something cold settle in her stomach. And now you're saving one of those monsters. No, he said firmly. Now I'm saving a person. Because I learned something important in 10 years of fighting. Not all vampires are like the ones who killed my sister, just like not all humans are like the raiders who burn villages or the corrupt nobles who bleed their subjects dry. Evil is evil regardless of what form it takes. And good, actual good, the kind that protects and builds instead of just destroying, that's rare enough that when you find it, you should probably try to preserve it even if it comes in an unexpected package. They reached the end of the tunnel where a rusted iron gate blocked the way. Marcus pulled a key from his belt, he had clearly been here before, and unlocked it. Beyond, she could hear the rush of the river, louder now, closer. The air smelled fresher, tinged with the green scent of water and night-blooming flowers. The river entrance was a wide arch built into the palace foundations, designed to channel storm runoff into the water. It was high enough to stand upright in, and Seraphine felt a moment of blessed relief as she straightened from the hunched position she had maintained in the narrower passages. Her wings, still bound tightly against her back, throbbed in protest, but at least she could stretch her legs. Marcus led her down a short ramp to where the sewer water merged with the river. The moon was bright tonight, nearly full, and its light turned the water into a ribbon of silver and black. The city rose behind them, smoke still rising from several districts, fires burning where the cleansing army had not bothered to put them out. She could see the palace silhouetted against the sky, its towers and spires dark and silent. How many times had she stood on those battlements and looked out over her kingdom? How many nights had she watched from those windows, planning, ruling, building? All gone now. All of it. Seraphine, Marcus said softly, and she realized she had been staring. The boat is this way. She followed him along the riverbank, moving carefully over the rocky ground. Her feet, still clad in the delicate shoes she had worn for what was supposed to have been a formal dinner, how long ago had that been? A lifetime ago, it seemed, were not made for this terrain. She felt one heel snap and nearly stumbled, but Marcus was there immediately, his arm steadying her. The boat was exactly where he had said, hidden under an old wooden dock that had probably not seen legitimate use in years. It was small, just a rowboat really, but it looked sound. Marcus helped her into it, settling her in the stern where she could lean back against the boards. Then he pushed off, hopping in smoothly and taking up the oars. He rowed with practiced efficiency, keeping close to the bank where the current was weakest. The monastery he had mentioned came into view after perhaps 10 minutes. She could see its ruins perched on a cliff above the river, its stone walls pale in the moonlight. It had been dedicated to some solar deity, she recalled vaguely, built back when this region was human-controlled, before her kind had claimed it. It had been abandoned even before her reign began, the priests moving to larger, more prosperous temples in the cities. There was a narrow inlet at the base of the cliff, barely visible unless you knew where to look. Marcus guided the boat into it expertly, and she saw stairs carved into the rock, leading upward. Old stairs, worn by centuries of weather and use but still intact. "Can you climb?" he asked, already knowing the answer would be difficult. "Do I have a choice?" she replied. "Not really. But I can go first and you can lean on me. We'll take it slowly." They did exactly that. The climb was brutal, each step sent pain shooting through her damaged body, and more than once she had to stop, gripping the wall, forcing herself to breathe through the agony. Marcus was patient, waiting whenever she needed to pause, offering his shoulder when she needed support, his presence a constant reassurance that she was not alone in this. At the top of the stairs was the monastery proper. It was more intact than she had expected. The outer walls were crumbling in places, and the roof of the main chapel had partially collapsed, but the living quarters and storage buildings seemed relatively sound. Marcus led her to one of these buildings, a small structure that must have been a meditation cell or personal chamber for one of the senior priests. Inside he had clearly spent time preparing. There was a bedroll laid out on the floor, covered with what looked like relatively clean blankets. A pile of supplies sat in one corner, food that would be useless to her but would sustain him, water skins, medical supplies, and most importantly, a series of clay jars that she recognized even before he opened one. Blood. The smell of it hit her immediately, triggering a desperate hunger that she had been suppressing through sheer will. "It's deer blood mostly," Marcus said, uncapping one of the jars and bringing it to her. "Some rabbit. I know it's not ideal, but it should help." She took the jar with trembling hands and drank deeply. The blood was cold, and animal blood never satisfied like human blood, but it was sustenance. She felt her body responding immediately, her vampiric healing beginning to kick in, working to repair the damage. It would be slow. Animal blood was poor fuel for regeneration, but it was better than nothing. She drank 3 jars before the immediate hunger faded. Marcus watched silently, and she was grateful that he did not look disgusted or afraid, merely concerned. When she finally lowered the last jar, she felt marginally more alive, though the pain had not lessened significantly. "We need to unbind your wings," Marcus said. "They need to be free to heal properly. But I'm going to be honest with you. This is going to hurt as much as binding them did." "Everything hurts," she said tiredly. "What's a little more?" He smiled slightly at that, then moved behind her and began carefully unwrapping the tapestry strips. True to his warning, releasing the wings was agony. They had stiffened in their bound position, and unfolding them sent new waves of pain through her back. She felt tears, actual tears, something she had not experienced in decades, prick at her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had not cried when her empire fell, she would not cry now over mere physical pain. Finally, the wings were free, spreading out behind her in their damaged glory. Marcus examined them carefully, and she saw his expression darken. "The right one is fractured here and here," he said, pointing to places where the bone structure was visibly bent. "The membrane is torn, but that should heal. The left is better, mostly bruising and one small tear. With enough blood and rest they should mend, but it will take time." "How much time?" she asked. "For full flight capacity? Weeks. Maybe a month. For basic functionality? A few days if we can get you proper blood." He moved to sit beside her, his back against the wall. "Which brings us to the harder question. What happens next? You're safe for now, but we can't stay here indefinitely. The cleansing army will eventually search this area. Your former subjects will be looking for any survivors. And you need more than animal blood if you're going to truly recover." Seraphine was silent, staring at her hands. They were still stained with blood, her own and others, and in the lamplight Marcus had lit, they looked fragile. Strange. She had never thought of herself as fragile. "I don't know," she admitted quietly. "I've spent 300 years ruling, building, planning. I always had a strategy, always had contingencies. But this, I didn't plan for this. I didn't plan for everyone leaving. I didn't plan for my empire to fall in a single night. I don't," she paused, forcing herself to say the words. "I don't know what to do now." Marcus was quiet for a moment, then spoke carefully. "You could run. Go far from here, find some remote place, rebuild your strength in secret. Start over somewhere else under a new identity. You're old enough and powerful enough to do that." "Is that what you think I should do?" she asked, hearing the challenge in her own voice. "I think," he said slowly, "that you should do whatever will let you keep living. Because from where I'm sitting, you have a lot left to offer this world, and it would be a shame to lose that just because one battle went badly." "One battle?" She laughed, and it was a bitter sound. "My empire fell. My people abandoned me. Everything I built over 3 centuries is gone. That's not just one battle, Marcus. That's everything." "No," he said firmly. "It's not. You're still here. That means it's not everything. That means there's still something left to build on." He shifted to face her more directly. "Your Majesty, Seraphine, empires rise and fall. I've seen it happen more times than I can count in my short life. Territory is lost and won and lost again. Power shifts like sand and wind. But you, the person you are, the knowledge you have, the wisdom you've accumulated, the capacity to rule fairly and protect those weaker than yourself, that doesn't disappear just because you lost a city. That's still there. That still matters. She wanted to believe him. Gods, she wanted to believe him. But the wound in her heart was still too fresh, the betrayal too raw. They left me, she whispered. All of them. Even those I had known for centuries. Even those I trusted. They looked at me bleeding on my throne and they calculated that I wasn't worth the risk anymore. What does that say about everything I built? It says they were cowards, Marcus replied bluntly. It says they mistook stability for loyalty and when things got difficult they showed their true colors. But that's on them, not on you. You can't control other people's choices, not really. You can only control your own. He reached out slowly, telegraphing the movement, and placed his hand over hers. And right now you're choosing to survive. That takes more strength than dying would. She looked at their joined hands, her pale fingers beneath his tanned, calloused ones, and felt something shift inside her. Not hope exactly. Hope seemed too bright, too optimistic for what she was feeling. But perhaps, possibility. The possibility that this was not the end. The possibility that there might be something beyond tonight, beyond this ruined cell in an abandoned monastery, beyond the pain and the betrayal. Why do you care so much? She asked quietly. You've answered, but I still don't understand. You owe me nothing. You could have left the city, gone far away, been safe. Why come back? Why risk everything for someone you don't even know? Marcus was silent for a long moment, his thumb absently moving across the back of her hand in a gentle, unconscious gesture of comfort. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft but steady. When my sister died, I was consumed by grief and rage. I wanted revenge so badly I could taste it. But my mother, she was a wise woman even in her pain, she told me something I didn't understand at the time. She said that the world has enough hate in it already, enough people willing to hurt others. What it needs, what it desperately needs, is people who are willing to stand with others when everything falls apart. People who choose compassion over convenience. People who stay. He looked up at her, and in his gray eyes she saw a reflection of her own pain, her own losses. I couldn't save my sister. I couldn't save the other people in my village. I've fought in battles where I've watched good people die because the right help didn't come in time, because someone calculated that they weren't worth the risk. I've seen too much death because people chose safety over solidarity. His grip on her hand tightened slightly. I'm here because you deserved someone who stayed. Because everyone deserves that at least once. And because if I had walked away, if I had let you die alone in that throne room, I would have become exactly the kind of person I've been fighting against my entire life. Seraphine felt something break open inside her. Not a breaking apart, but a breaking open like ice cracking to reveal water beneath. And this time when the tears came she did not stop them. They rolled down her cheeks, leaving tracks through the dried blood and dust, and she found she did not care. This human, this impossible, idealistic, foolishly brave human, had given her something she thought she had lost forever. He had seen her not as a queen or a monster or a title, but as a person. Someone worth saving not for what she could do or what she represented, but simply because she deserved not to die alone. Thank you, she whispered, her voice breaking. Thank you for staying. Marcus smiled, and there was no triumph in it, no satisfaction at having won some argument. Just warmth and steadiness and the quiet strength of someone who had made a promise and intended to keep it. Always, he said simply. For as long as you need me, I'll stay. They sat in silence for a while, both of them exhausted, both of them processing the events of this impossible night. Outside, the sky was beginning to lighten in the east, not yet dawn but the precursor to it. Seraphine felt the familiar pull of day sleep tugging at her consciousness. She needed rest, needed to let her body heal. You should sleep, Marcus said, seeming to read her thoughts. I'll keep watch. The monastery is remote enough that we should be safe during the day, but I'll make sure. She wanted to argue, wanted to say that she did not need protection, that she had survived for 300 years without a guardian. But the truth was that right now she did need protection. Right now she was vulnerable in ways she had not been since she was newly turned. And the fact that he was offering without expecting anything in return, no payment, no promises, no sworn oaths of fealty, that was something new and strange and precious. Wake me if there's danger, she said, her eyes already growing heavy. And Marcus, thank you. For everything. Rest, Seraphine, he said gently. We'll figure out tomorrow when tomorrow comes. She let herself sink into the bedroll he had prepared, her wings spreading out behind her on the stone floor. The pain was still there, a constant presence, but the blood had taken the edge off, and exhaustion was a weight she could no longer resist. As she felt consciousness slipping away, her last thought was not of her lost empire or her betrayed trust, but of the warm pressure of a human hand holding hers, and the sound of a voice promising to stay. She slept. When Seraphine woke, the sun had long since set and the world outside was dark once more. She lay still for a moment, disoriented, her mind struggling to reconcile the stone ceiling above her with the ornate bedroom ceiling she had woken beneath for decades. Then memory came crashing back. The siege, the abandonment, the throne room, Marcus, and she sat up abruptly, ignoring the protest from her injuries. The cell was lit by a single candle now, its flame casting dancing shadows on the walls. Marcus sat near the door, his sword across his lap, clearly having spent the day keeping watch as promised. He looked up when she moved and she saw the relief cross his face. "How do you feel?" he asked, setting the sword aside and moving closer. She took inventory. The pain was still present but significantly reduced. Her ribs no longer felt like they were grinding against each other when she breathed. Her wings, she carefully flexed them, still ached, but the sharp agony had dulled to a more manageable throb. The wounds on her side and shoulder were closing, the vampire healing finally having enough fuel to work properly. "Better?" she said, surprised by how much she meant it. "Not well, but better." "That's good. I brought more blood." He indicated a fresh set of jars near the bedroll. "And I scouted the area during the day. There's been no activity nearby. I think we're safe for at least another few days." She drank the blood he offered, feeling her strength continue to return. As she did, she studied him more carefully than she had last night. In the chaos and pain of their escape, she had not really looked at him as more than a presence, a voice offering help. Now she saw details. The way his armor bore marks that suggested he had fought his way to her throne room rather than simply walking in unopened. The half-healed cut on his jaw that spoke of recent combat. The exhaustion around his eyes that suggested he had not slept during the day, despite having been awake all night. "You need rest," she said. "You've been awake for more than 24 hours. "I'm fine," he started to say, but she cut him off with a look. "I may be wounded, but I am not powerless. I can keep watch while you sleep. You've done enough, let me do this small thing in return." He hesitated, clearly torn between practicality and some ingrained sense that he should be the protector. Finally, practical one. "A few hours," he conceded. "Then we need to talk about what comes next." "Agreed. Sleep, Marcus. I'll wake you if anything threatens." She watched as he settled onto the floor. She noticed he did not take the bedroll, leaving it for her, and within minutes his breathing had evened out into sleep. She moved quietly to the door, peering out into the night. The monastery was silent except for the wind moving through its broken walls, and beyond it, she could hear the river and the distant sounds of the forest. For the first time since the siege began, she let herself really think about her situation. Her empire was gone, that was an unchangeable fact. Even if by some miracle she could reclaim her palace and her territory, she had no subjects left to rule. They had scattered to the winds, either fleeing the cleansing army or abandoning her to save themselves. Building it all back would take decades, if not centuries, and she would have to do it while being actively hunted by the church and her reputation in tatters. The logical move was what Marcus had suggested. Run. Go far from here, perhaps across the ocean to the eastern continents where the church's power was weaker. Find some remote region and lie low for a century or two until this current wave of persecution passed. She had the knowledge and power to eventually carve out a new territory, smaller perhaps, but safer. But the thought of running, of abandoning everything she had built and everyone she had protected, sat like poison in her stomach. Yes, her court had abandoned her. Yes, her inner circle had fled. But what about the mortal villages under her protection? What about the trade agreements that had kept thousands fed? What about the laws she had established that prevented casual slaughter by roaming vampire bands? Without her influence, this entire region would descend into chaos. The cleansing army would install puppet rulers who would exploit the population. Raiders would sweep through undefended territories, and the more vicious of her kind would take advantage of the power vacuum to run wild. She had built something that mattered. And yes, it had fallen, but that did not mean the need for it had disappeared. "You're thinking too loud," Marcus's voice came from behind her, and she turned to see him sitting up, clearly not as asleep as she had thought. "I can practically hear the gears turning in your head." "I thought you were resting," she said. "I tried. But I spent all day thinking about this too, and pretending to sleep isn't going to change the fact that we need to make some decisions." He stood and joined her at the door, looking out at the night. "You're thinking about going back, aren't you? Not to the palace, but to the territory. You're thinking about trying to salvage something from this mess." She was silent for a moment, then nodded. "Is that foolish?" "Maybe," he admitted. "But I don't think it's wrong. Running would be safer, but it would also mean abandoning a lot of people who depend on the order you established. I've seen what happens when power structures collapse completely. It's not pretty. The strong prey on the weak, and the innocent suffer most." He glanced at her. "If you want to try to rebuild, I'll help. But we need to be realistic about what's possible." "Tell me," she said. "What do you see as possible?" Marcus leaned against the doorframe, his expression thoughtful. "The palace and the capital are lost. The cleansing army will occupy them for months, maybe years. Your former court has scattered, and even if you could find them, I'm not sure you'd want them back after what they did. But your territory is larger than just the capital. There are outlying regions, smaller cities, villages that were under your protection. Some of those might still be loyal or at least willing to listen." He paused, organizing his thoughts. "Here's what I think. You need to rebuild, but smaller. Not an empire this time, just a stronghold. Find one of the remote cities, somewhere defensible, and establish yourself there. Gather those who are actually loyal, not the opportunists and the cowards, but people who understand what you were trying to build. Create a refuge for both vampires and mortals who want to live under fair laws rather than chaos or persecution." "A refuge," she repeated slowly, testing the word. "Not an empire. A sanctuary." "Exactly. You can't challenge the cleansing army head-on right now. You're not strong enough and they have all the momentum. But you can create something that survives, that preserves what was good about your rule. And maybe, over time, that grows into something larger. Or maybe it just stays small and safe. Either way, it's better than losing everything." Seraphine considered this, turning the idea over in her mind. It went against every instinct she had developed over 3 centuries, the instinct to expand, to dominate, to rule absolutely. But those instincts had led her to last night's disaster. Perhaps it was time for a different approach. "There's a city," she said slowly. "Thornhaven in the western mountains. It's remote, defensible, built into the cliffs themselves. I established it 200 years ago as a trading post, but it's grown since then. The governor there is a vampire named Elena. She's young, only about 70, but she's proven herself capable. And more importantly, she owes her position to me personally. I saved her from being executed by her own sire for refusing to participate in his massacres. If anyone might still be loyal, it would be her." "How far?" Marcus asked. "About 200 miles as the crow flies. Through mountains and forests, which means difficult travel but also good cover. There are several villages along the way. We'd need to be careful, but if we moved at night and stayed off the main roads, we could make it in perhaps 2 weeks on foot. Can you travel that far? In your condition?" She looked down at herself, at her torn dress and bound wounds, at wings that could barely fold properly, let alone carry her in flight. 2 weeks ago she could have flown that distance in a single night. Now she would be lucky to walk it without collapsing. "I'll have to," she said simply. "What other choice do I have?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "All right. Then here's what we do. We spend another 2 days here while you continue healing. I'll hunt for more blood, gather supplies, scout the route. Once you're strong enough to travel, we move fast and careful. We avoid all contact with anyone until we reach Thornhaven, and we pray that your governor is as loyal as you hope." "And if she's not?" Seraphine asked. "If she's fled like the others, or worse, if she's decided to buy favor with the cleansing army by turning me in? Then we adapt," Marcus said. "We find another way. But I don't think that's going to happen. You said she owes you her life. That's a powerful bond. And more than that, you've given her something to believe in. People don't abandon that lightly, not if they have any integrity at all. She wanted to point out that her entire court had abandoned exactly that, but she held her tongue. He was trying to give her hope, and perhaps he was right. Perhaps not everyone she had trusted had proven false. Perhaps there were some worth saving in the wreckage. 2 days, she agreed. We rest and prepare for 2 days. Then we travel to Thornhaven and see what remains of my legacy. They spent those 2 days in careful preparation. Marcus proved to be an excellent hunter. Each night he returned with fresh kills, and she drank the blood while it was still warm, feeling her strength returning with each feeding. Her wounds closed completely, leaving only faint scars that would fade in time. Her ribs healed, allowing her to breathe and move without constant pain. Her wings remained the slowest to mend, but even they improved, the fractures knitting together, the torn membranes scarring over. She still could not fly, that would require more time and more blood, but she could fold and unfold them without agony, and that was progress. During the days while she slept the sleep of the undead, Marcus kept watch and gathered supplies. He raided an abandoned farm and returned with traveling clothes for both of them, practical garments that would not draw attention, unlike her ruined royal gown. He found a pack to carry supplies, acquired a second sword for her to use if needed, and even managed to locate a map of the Western Territories. At night when they were both awake they talked. Not about politics or strategy but about smaller things. He told her about his childhood, about growing up in a small village, about his sister who had loved to paint and had dreams of becoming an artist in the capital. About his years in the militia, the battles he had fought, the friends he had made and lost. About the slow process of questioning everything he had been taught, of realizing that the world was more complex than the simple narratives of good versus evil that the church preached. She in turn found herself sharing things she had not spoken of in decades. About her human life, which she barely remembered. She had been turned so young, only 17, and 3 centuries had blurred those mortal memories into impressions rather than clear recollections. About her early years as a vampire, struggling to understand what she had become, learning to control the hunger. About the wars that had forged her into a queen, the alliances and betrayals that had taught her about power. About the loneliness of ruling, of being surrounded by people who wanted something from you but who never truly saw you. I had forgotten what this was like, she admitted on the second night, as they sat in companionable silence watching the stars through a gap in the monastery roof. Talking to someone who doesn't want anything except conversation. Who doesn't have an agenda or a scheme. Nice. I had forgotten nice existed. It's one of the better parts of being alive, Marcus said. Sometimes we get so caught up in surviving or achieving or proving ourselves that we forget to just exist alongside other people. No goals, no outcomes, just being. He smiled. My mother used to say that we're not meant to be alone. That people, all people, human or otherwise, are made to connect with others. That's what makes us more than just clever animals. Your mother sounds like she was very wise, Seraphine said. She was. She didn't live long enough for me to fully appreciate it, but I've spent the years since trying to live up to her teachings. He glanced at Seraphine. I think she would have liked you actually. She always said that power was meaningless if it wasn't used to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. That's what you did, isn't it? In your own way. I tried, Seraphine said softly. I didn't always succeed. I made mistakes. I was harsh when I should have been merciful, and perhaps too merciful when I should have been harsh. I ruled with fear because fear was effective, but I forgot that fear can't sustain loyalty forever. In the end, when my people had to choose between their fear of me and their fear of the cleansing army, she trailed off, not needing to finish the sentence. Fear is a tool, Marcus said, but it's not a foundation. You know that now. So when you rebuild, you build on something else. On justice. On protection. On proving that following you means safety and fairness, not just survival. He met her eyes. You have a chance to do it differently this time. Smaller maybe, but better. More real. She nodded slowly, feeling the weight of those words settle over her. A chance to do it differently. A chance to build something that would last not because it was strong enough to crush opposition, but because it was worth preserving. The idea was both terrifying and exhilarating. On the morning of the 3rd day, as dawn approached and Seraphine prepared for sleep, Marcus made his final preparations for their journey. He had mapped their route carefully, marking water sources and potential shelter, noting villages to avoid and mountain passes that would provide cover. When Seraphine woke at dusk, he presented it to her, and she was impressed by the thoroughness of his planning. "You missed your calling," she said, studying the map. "You should have been a strategist, not just a soldier." "I was too busy following orders to think about giving them," Marcus replied. "But I learned by watching. And I had some good commanders over the years. I paid attention to how they thought, how they planned." He rolled the map back up and secured it in his pack. "Ready to walk 200 miles through hostile territory with a wanted vampire queen? Is it too late to choose the safe option of running away to a different continent?" she asked dryly. "Probably. But where's the adventure in safe?" He offered her a smile, then shouldered his pack. "Come on, Your Majesty. We have a city to reach and a legacy to salvage." They set out that night, leaving the monastery behind. Seraphine took one last look at the small cell that had sheltered them, at the crumbling walls that had provided safety when she had none, and felt a strange gratitude toward this abandoned holy place. Then she turned westward, toward the mountains and Thornhaven and whatever future awaited them there. The journey was hard. Even with her healing advanced, Seraphine tired more easily than she ever had before. Her wings, still too damaged for flight, had to be kept carefully folded to avoid catching on branches or snagging on rocks. They traveled only at night, hiding during the day in whatever shelter they could find. Caves, abandoned buildings, dense forest groves where Marcus would keep watch while she slept. They avoided all settlements, living on the blood of animals that Marcus hunted and the dried food he had packed for himself. There were close calls. Once, they nearly stumbled into a patrol of church soldiers camped across their path. Another time, they had to detour around a village that turned out to be hosting a traveling inquisitor who was preaching about the fall of the vampire queen and offering rewards for information about survivors from her court. They heard rumors as they traveled, whispers carried on the wind or overheard from a distance, that Seraphine Valdres had been slain in her throne room, that her body had been burned and her ashes scattered, that the cleansing army was systematically hunting down every vampire in the territory. But they also heard other rumors, quieter ones, more hopeful ones. Stories of villages that were suffering under the new occupation, that missed the order and protection of the old regime. Mentions of resistance groups forming in the mountains, vampires and sympathetic humans who refused to accept the church's dominion. Talk of a city in the west, Thornhaven, that had closed its gates and declared itself independent, refusing to acknowledge the cleansing army's authority. That last rumor made Seraphine's heart lift. If Thornhaven had declared independence, then Elena had not fled. She had chosen to stand, to hold what they had built together. There was still something left to fight for. They reached the mountain passes on the 8th day of travel. The terrain became increasingly difficult. Steep climbs, narrow paths, sections where they had to rope themselves together to traverse dangerous ledges. Marcus proved to be an excellent climbing partner, his soldiers' strength and endurance serving them well. Seraphine's vampiric abilities helped too, her enhanced strength compensating for her injuries, though she had to be careful not to overextend herself. On the 10th night, they crossed the highest pass and saw Thornhaven spread out below them in the valley. It was a beautiful sight. The city was built into the cliff face itself, its buildings carved from the stone or constructed from local materials that blended seamlessly with the rock. Lights glowed in windows, warm and welcoming against the darkness. The defensive walls were intact, and she could see guards patrolling them, vigilant and organized. "It stands," she whispered, feeling something that might have been tears prick at her eyes again. "It still stands." "More than stands," Marcus said, pointing. "Look at the gates. They're reinforced. And those positions on the walls, those are new. Elena's been preparing for a siege." He was right. The city had clearly been fortified since news of the capital's fall had reached it. Whoever held Thornhaven now had been expecting trouble and had prepared to weather it. "We need to get inside," Seraphine said. "But carefully. If Elena has prepared for a siege, she'll have sentries watching the approaches. I don't want to be killed by my own people because we look like an advanced scouting party." They descended carefully, and as they approached the main road to the city gates, Seraphine called out in the formal language of her court, a dialect that only those who had served in her inner circles would immediately recognize. "Elena Thornhart, governor of this city and blood daughter of the House of Valdres, I request entrance and shelter under the old compact." There was a long moment of silence. Then activity burst out on the walls, shouting, the sound of a bell being rung, torches being lit. Within minutes, the gates were opening, and a woman was striding out accompanied by a group of armed guards. Elena Thornhart looked much as Seraphine remembered, tall and elegant, with dark hair pulled back in a practical braid, wearing armor that was both functional and stylish. Her red eyes widened as she took in the sight before her, and Seraphine saw shock, disbelief, and then overwhelming relief cross her face in rapid succession. "My queen," Elena breathed, and then she was running, closing the distance between them, dropping to one knee before Seraphine. "My queen, they said you were dead. They said the cleansing army had killed you, that there were no survivors." "Reports of my death were premature," Seraphine said, and found herself smiling despite everything. "Though not by much. I survived because of this man, Marcus Strand, who has proven himself the most loyal companion I could have asked for." She placed a hand on Elena's shoulder. "Rise, old friend. We have much to discuss, but first I desperately need proper blood and a place to finish healing. Can you provide both?" "Everything I have is yours," Elena said, rising and gesturing toward the city. "Everything we've built here is yours. We've been holding the city in your name, waiting for word, hoping." Her voice broke slightly. "Hoping that the rumors were wrong." As they walked through the gates of Thornhaven, Seraphine felt something settle in her chest. Not quite hope, not yet, but something close. She had lost her empire. She had lost her palace and her court and 300 years of careful construction. But she had gained something too, the knowledge of who was truly loyal, the experience of being saved rather than always being the savior, and the beginning of a different kind of strength. She glanced at Marcus, walking beside her with easy confidence despite being surrounded by vampires who could kill him without effort. He caught her look and smiled, and she found herself smiling back. Perhaps empires were overrated. Perhaps what mattered more was having someone who stayed when everyone else left. Someone who saw you not as a title or a throne or a source of power, but simply as a person worth saving. Perhaps starting over, building something smaller but stronger, was not failure but wisdom. The weeks that followed were a blur of activity. Seraphine established herself in Thornhaven not as an empress demanding fealty, but as a protector offering partnership. She met with Elena and the city council, a mixed group of vampires and humans who governed the city together, and presented her vision. Thornhaven would become a sanctuary, a place where both mortal and immortal could live under fair laws, where strength was used to defend rather than oppress, where loyalty was earned rather than commanded. The response was overwhelmingly positive. These people had already been living under such principles. Elena had modeled her governance on Seraphine's better policies, and having the legendary queen herself present to guide and protect them was more than they had dared to hope for. Marcus became an unexpected bridge between the human and vampire populations. His story spread quickly. The human soldier who had saved the vampire queen, who had stayed when everyone else fled, who had proven that loyalty and honor could transcend species. He was respected by both communities, and he used that respect to mediate disputes, suggest improvements to the city's defenses, and train a militia of volunteers who wanted to protect their new sanctuary. Seraphine's wings healed fully about 6 weeks after their arrival. The first time she flew again, just a short flight around the city's perimeter, she felt a freedom she had not known she had lost. Marcus watched from below, and when she landed beside him, he was grinning. "Show off," he said affectionately. "I am a queen," she replied with mock dignity. Showing off is part of the job description. They established patterns, routines. During the day while Seraphine slept, Marcus worked with the city guard and managed various practical matters. At night, they would meet and discuss the day's events, plan for the future, and often simply sit together in companionable silence on the balcony of the governor's building, watching the city and the stars. One night, about 3 months after their arrival, Seraphine found herself studying Marcus as he stood at the railing, looking out over Thornhaven. He had become so integral to her existence in such a short time. She tried to imagine what would have happened if he had not walked into her throne room that night, and the thought made something cold settle in her chest. "Marcus," she said quietly, "can I ask you something?" "Always," he replied, turning to face her. "Do you regret it? Saving me? Abandoning your old life? You could have been safe, could have been far from here by now. Instead you're in a city that might be under siege at any moment, surrounded by vampires, living a life you never chose. Do you regret it?" He was silent for a moment, considering the question seriously. Then he shook his head. Not even for a second. This, he gestured around them, this matters. What we're building here, it's important. And even if it wasn't, even if we were just hiding in that monastery with no greater purpose, I still wouldn't regret it. He met her eyes. You asked me once why I did it, why I stayed. The answer hasn't changed, because everyone deserves someone who won't leave. And because you're worth staying for. Seraphine felt something warm bloom in her chest, something she had not felt in so long she almost did not recognize it. It was not love. Not yet, perhaps that would come with time, but it was connection. Trust. The knowledge that she was seen and valued not for her power or position, but simply for herself. Thank you, she said softly. For everything. For staying when everyone else left. For seeing something worth saving when I couldn't see it myself. For giving me a reason to rebuild rather than simply survive. You don't need to thank me, Marcus said, moving closer. We're partners in this, remember? You saved me as much as I saved you. How did I save you? She asked, genuinely curious. You gave me a purpose beyond revenge or orders. You showed me that choosing compassion over cruelty is possible even in the darkest circumstances. You let me be the person I always wanted to be but never had the courage to become on my own. He smiled. We saved each other, Seraphine. That's how this works. She reached out and took his hand, and they stood together in the moonlight, looking out over the city they were building together. Not an empire, but something better. A home. A sanctuary. A place where loyalty was real and abandonment was just a bad memory. The cleansing army never came to Thornhaven. They were too busy consolidating their control over the capital and the eastern territories, too confident that the remnants of vampire power were shattered beyond recovery. Let them think that, Seraphine decided. Let them believe they had won completely. Meanwhile, she would build here, slowly and carefully, creating something that would last not through fear but through choice. Years passed. Thornhaven grew and prospered. Other refugees found their way there. Vampires who had been displaced by the conquest, humans who were fleeing persecution or seeking a place where the old ways of protection and partnership still existed. The city became known as a legend, a place where the impossible happened, where ancient enemies lived in peace. And at the center of it all were two figures who had become inseparable. The vampire queen who had lost everything and learned what truly mattered, and the human soldier who had proven that loyalty was stronger than fear. They built not an empire but a legacy. Not through conquest but through compassion. Not by commanding fear but by earning love. And neither of them ever regretted the night that one human refused to leave, when everyone else had fled, proving that sometimes the greatest strength comes not from power, but from the simple act of staying.